Dr. Gamboa. So could you tell us, first of all, what are the causes for university professors within Venezuela leaving the country, and what are the conditions in which they do so?
Yeah, first I would like to thank the institutions which support this event. I'm going to speak English because maybe we can take we can take advantage of the time, but please, the interpreter, be very close to me. In general terms, I think we have to emphasize the general framework about the situation of the diaspora, the situation of the massive exodus of Venezuelans. And I would like to quote the position of the High Commissioner of Human Rights from the United Nations, Mr. Saeed Rad al-Hussein. He spoke before the Human Rights Council of the United Nations on March 7th, and he expressed the general concerns about the situation of Venezuela in front of this important Human Rights Council before the international community. And in his speech, he addressed the concerns, and I'm going to quote him. He said, "I am deeply disturbed by the growing exodus of Venezuelans from their country, many of them seeking access to food and basic services." So, but in this 1 minute of the intervention of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, he described the general situation of violation of human rights and the general situation of lack of democracy that we are facing in Venezuela. So let's listen to him. This one. Yep.
This one?
Yep.
And I just click on...
Le das clic a la foto.
Perfect.
It was 3 weeks ago.
Mr. President, the human rights in Venezuela is deeply alarming. Malnutrition has increased dramatically throughout the country, affecting in particular children and the elderly. And credible reports indicate that government assistance programs are often conditioned on political considerations. I'm also deeply alarmed by the possibility that crimes against humanity have been committed and by the erosion of democratic institutions. The fundamental principle of separation of powers has been severely compromised. My office has also received credible reports of hundreds of extrajudicial killings in recent years, both during protests and security operations. I am seriously concerned that this context does not in any way fulfill minimal conditions for free and credible elections. I am deeply disturbed by the growing exodus of Venezuelans from their country, many of them in search of access to food and basic services. Once again, I encourage the Council to consider mandating a commission of inquiry to investigate human rights violations in Venezuela.
Yeah, you noticed that he did any reference about the possible commission of crimes against humanity, and that the High Commissioner of Human Rights of the United Nations are taking in consideration these situations. I would like to listen only 20 seconds the speech that the representative, that is spokesperson from the High Commissioner for Refugees have done 2 weeks ago about the situation of the outflow from Venezuelans.
We know that every day more and more Venezuelans are leaving the country. It is believed that over 1.5 million are living abroad based on conservative government estimates. This means that the Americas is facing one of the largest population outflows in the region since the creation
Yeah, so the High Commissioner for Refugees, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, had said that they think that this exodus is one of the largest that the region, the Americas, have had since the creation of the United Nations for Refugees. I mean, since 1950. So, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights had produced a resolution number 218 in March, 1 month ago. It was on March 2nd. And they, in this resolution, they are focused on the report that the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights had published on February, 2 months ago, called Democratic Institutions, the Rule of Law, and Human Rights in Venezuela. It was the last report that the Inter-American Commission had produced, focused specifically on situation of Venezuela, democracy, rule of law, and violations of human rights. In this report, the Inter-American Commission highlighted the political, economic, and social crisis in Venezuela in recent years, as well as the multiple and massive violations of human rights of the majority of Venezuelan population, with particular impacts on the rights to life, personal integrity, personal liberty, freedom of expression, freedom of movement, judicial protection, health, food, and work. And so the Inter-American Commission considers that the massive violations of human rights, as well as the serious crisis that Venezuela has been facing as a result of the shortage of food and medicine, has led to the exponential growth of hundreds of thousands of Venezuelan people who have been forced to migrate to other countries. So, in general terms, the general framework of the causes of the general outflow from Venezuela to other countries, we have to mention the situation of human rights, the lackness of democracy, and the general violations of human rights. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees identifies also some other reasons, and I'm going to quote: threats by armed groups, fear of being targeted on account of political opinion, real or perceived, insecurity and violence, lack of food, medicine, or access to essential social services, as well as loss of income. On the other hand, regarding the question that Jesus just did, the situation of the diaspora integrated by Venezuelan professors is really concerning, because most of the young people, professional young people right now, is thinking in leaving the country, and the situation inside the universities with university professors is really concerning. It's really hard. We produce in Aula Abierta and the Human Rights Commission of University of Zulia State some reports about the restrictions and reprisals against autonomy and academic freedom, the practice of discriminatory practices in the higher education system, and criminalization of university protest in Venezuela, specifically focused on last year, 2017. And there we identify some concerns. The first one regarding this matter is the situation of the salaries of university professors. We have in the same slide graphic information about the situation of the salary of university professors, and so they are around $9 to $14 per month, with the data updated to March of this year. So we can check.
Yeah, I'm gonna go down to the salaries, right?
It depends, it varies, depending the level of the professor, but if you compare this amount of money with the salaries that any university professor has in other countries, situation will be really dramatic. So if you see the last arrow, you can change the, you can see the different amounts between $9 to 11 or $14 per month. It depends on the level, but I don't want to spend more time on this. And it is really interesting because while it's not updated to March, it's updated to August of last year. So in August of last year, professors were receiving monthly the equivalent of $5, $6, $7 per month. If you compare that amount with the United States rate, around $4,000, or even the Germany one or the Luxembourg, you can understand one of the biggest causes of the exodus from university professors from Venezuela. But there is a general framework regarding the situation of the universities and human rights that I would like to address in a very brief framework. First, the situation of the normative, the law in Venezuela, although we have some grounds in Constitution regarding the autonomy of the universities and regarding the right to education, and in consequence regarding the academic freedom, there are some trends in the law, organic law of education, and the second socialist plan for economic and social development of the nation, 2013 to 2019, which was given to the unconstitutionally, indeed, given in force as law in 2013, because all the situation regarding the higher education in Venezuela is conditioned by ideologist approaches. And so in this socialist plan, there are some articles that make reference on that. And the other threats that we have reported are the ones from the National Constitutional Assembly, which had expressed that the objective is to subordinate the National Council of Universities and all the activities from universities to its National Constituent Assembly, and in reiterative situations, they have addressed statements threaten both university autonomy and academic freedom. Besides that, we have a general concern about the criminalization of protest and political discrimination against university students and professors. In the 2017, we produced some reports about that. We sent those reports to the United Nations human rights bodies and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Actually, we addressed, for instance, in Zulia State, the situation of the students of the scholarship Jesus Enrique Lozada, which were temporarily disincorporated because of the parties their participation in the activation of the recall referendum against President Nicolas Maduro, or the situation of these students who were forced to subscribe some voter registration forms in the context of the elections, regional elections in Venezuela on October last year. And we have some cases regarding the situation of discrimination against some professors or some students who have manifest some criticism or political opposition to national government in some universities, such as UNEFA or the Bolivarian University of Venezuela. We have to try to finish some concerns about violations of university autonomy, attacks against the university campuses by the state security forces. At least we counted last year 21 attacks or inherencies from government to select universities boards representatives. I mean, the situation, for instance, of the appointing the vice-rector of the Simon Bolivar University to a person who was military, or the situation of intervening the selection of the current rector, president of the Universidad Centro Occidental Lisandro Alvarado de UCLA in Barquisimeto. We have reported the interference of internal rules of self-governance and participation and the siege of the Venezuelan judicial power against university. We have counted at least 43 judgments have been registered that directly violate the content of academic freedom, university autonomy, and consequently the right to a quality education. There is a decision from the Electoral Chamber of the Supreme Court of Justice in 2010, which ordered the suspension of election in universities' environments. I mean, the presidents, the rector, or deans, or even other decisions, the suspension of student elections inside the universities. And there is some cases related to suspending the academic competitions of professors. For instance, the case in the UCB, University, Central University of Venezuela, and even in the ULA, University of Los Andes. In this case, the judge, in her Twitter account, appeared that she defines herself as a soldier of social revolution. This situation called our attention. In general terms, the threats to educational quality, such as the reiterative blackouts and even daily electricity cuts across the even main cities of the country, the very limited funds for research services and infrastructure in universities, and the systematic and accelerated deterioration of internet or telephone services in Venezuela are mentioned in this report.
Thank you so much for your participation. I would also like to ask you about, very briefly, if Aula Abierta has done research on what happens once there is this exodus of professionals in the higher education field when they go to other countries. Do they usually work in the same capacity, or are they constrained by differences between the countries' statuses on education?
Yeah, this is the current situation of the diaspora, which has really concerning data, but we were trying to check the data from the High Commissioner of Refugees from the United Nations. They say that at least 1.5 million of Venezuelans had outflowed the country. But the spokesperson in the High Commissioner said that it was a conservative data because it was provided by the government. We are sure that the data is much more, but we cannot specify the exactly amount because this information is only in the power of government, because government is which has the, the control of the borders in Venezuela. But most of people that is living, for instance, from Zulia State to Colombia, is going to Colombia not by the official borders, is going to Colombia, is leaving the country by informal ways, what we refer in Zulia State as trochas, or other paths or ways. The High Commissioner had issued some data that is in the data website of them. We can go the next one. These are some graphics about criminalization of protest. If you want to have it, I can send it by email, or I can give it to Jesus. Yeah, following. Well, and in those reports that international bodies of human rights had produced, I mean the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, or the High Commissioner for Refugees, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, they mention some data about the situation of the outflow of Venezuelans. For instance, the Inter-American Commission, the resolution 218, I will quote, they say, in the context of the forced migration crisis that the Venezuelan people face, there are gaps in protection for the effective enjoyment of human rights. Among these, the Inter-American Commission is concerned about practices such as rejections at the border, collective expulsion or deportation, the difficulty that many Venezuelans face to obtain passports, and in the context of university rights, it is really important, or the big problem that represents not to have your documents with the apostille of the Hague, apostilla de la Haya, because some people have denounced that it take at least last year around 1 or 2 years to have the stamp of the apostille of the Hague, or other official documents required by some states to regularize their status or enter their territories, as well as to pay the cost of visa applications. We are inside the external currency control, and we don't have dollars, we don't have access to dollars, but every Venezuelan that goes to abroad, of course, need dollars, especially to pay this kind of documents, and equal access to rights in destination countries. Among the many challenges that Venezuelans face when migrating, the Inter-American Commission also highlights obstacles to obtaining international protection, discrimination, threats to life and personal integrity, sexual and gender-based violence, abuse and exploitation, human trafficking, disappearance of migrants and refugees, the discovery of clandestine, lack of identity documents, as well as obstacles in access to humanitarian assistance, particularly access to housing, health, food, education, and other basic services. University professors who left the country, who have left the country, have the same problems. And the Inter-American Commission emphasized the situation of serious xenophobic and discriminatory practices against Venezuelans in countries of transit and destination, including insults, abuses by authorities and individuals, extortion, and rhetoric that stigmatize and criminalize Venezuelans by blaming them for increases the rates of violence, of delinquency in their country. It is really reiterative, for instance, in the case of Panama, or even in Colombia, in the border states of Colombia. And the Inter-American Commission has said that many Venezuelans are more exposed to becoming victims of human rights trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation, forced prostitution, labor exploitation, or servitude and practices similar to slavery. So, I mean, this general situation is really concerning in the case of the academic diaspora. The brain drain in Venezuela has been alarming. We have some data, but it's not very specific, but because it's almost impossible to find it. But we can say that due to the precarious salary conditions, the university professors are leaving the country. The Central University of Venezuela and the University of Oriente have the most alarming number of dropouts, with an estimate between the 20 and 50%. At the University of Oriente, a figure of 20% was obtained, which only has 120 ground educators for an enrollment of 2,500 students. For the University of Carabobo and the University of Los Andes, the estimated amount is between 30% to 40%. In Zulia's University, for instance, the Faculty of Agronomy, professional desertion is located in 35%. In the last 2 years, more than 30 concours for selecting professors were offered, in which only 2 or 3 applicants attended on average. And the situation of the salaries is really concerning, and the situation of the stimulus to investigation is really concerning. For instance, there is a, well, it doesn't matter. The PAY, this is the program, Research and Innovation Stimulus Program, pay for the researchers, level C researchers at PAY, who need a doctorate course, who need to be a doctor. He receives a rate equivalent of 90 cents of a dollar. $1, less than $1. And so, in the states where Venezuelans are going, this situation is happening with all Venezuelans. In more cases, in less cases, it depends. But general concerns are in general.
Okay, thank you so much for your participation. Now, before we go into the Q&A session, where you'll get to ask any questions you have for our panelists, I would like to ask a general question for both of our panelists. And it would be, so what's next? What is the next steps for the Venezuelan diaspora, just as yourselves, who are trying to bring awareness and also addressing some of these violations? What are the recommendations for anyone who's living abroad in terms of participating and contributing to mitigating the violation of human rights in our country? And let's ask Dr. Tamara first.
La pregunta es el papel del rol de la diáspora.
Sí, ¿cómo la diáspora puede participar en estos proyectos, en estos programas?
Yo creo que cada quien está haciendo cada uno en lo que puede ayudar. Siempre la he visto activada en todos mis viajes donde he ido. Se reúnen, hacen foros, preguntan qué pueden hacer, qué más pueden hacer, y yo creo que cada uno de nosotros, cada uno de ustedes es una voz que lleva lo que escucha en estos foros, lo que escucha de personas que vienen a hablarles de lo que está sucediendo, para difundir ese mensaje entre las personas que no son venezolanas, que no entienden el problema venezolano y al cual tenemos que explicarles siempre qué es lo que está pasando en Venezuela. Nosotros pensamos y damos por hecho que todo el mundo sabe lo que nos pasa, y no es así. Porque cada... Ay, perdón.
Everyone in all of my travels, I have seen that the diaspora is very activated, that they make forums, they create events, and every one of you is a continuous voice which helps carry out and spread the message of what is going on in Venezuela, because I believe that most of us assume that the international community knows what is going on in Venezuela, but that is not the case.
Asumir que los demás saben el problema nuestro es una equivocación, porque cada país y cada persona tiene sus propios problemas. Entonces, el papel de la diáspora es justamente hablarle a esas personas, hablarle a parlamentos, hablarle a gobiernos de lo grave que nos está pasando en Venezuela para que nos presten atención.
Assuming that everyone knows what our situation is a mistake, what our issues are, because every country has its own issues. And so I believe that it is the role of the diaspora to bring attention to our problems, to speak to parliaments, senates, bodies of government about what is going on to us, what's happening to us in Venezuela, and to inform them of our current situation.
Y por eso que cada uno de ustedes debe transformarse en un portavoz de lo que escucha y de lo que aprende para transmitirlo donde viven, porque tan importante es hablar con gobiernos, hablar con presidentes, con parlamentarios, como hablar con la gente con la que ustedes comparten.
And I believe every one of you should become a messenger and carry out the voice, carry out this information, because it is just as important to speak to senators, to speak to presidents, to speak to government officials, as it is to speak to the people in the communities with which you interact.
Yeah, on one hand, I would like to emphasize the idea of Venezuelan diaspora needs to be recognized by the different states where Venezuelans are going as people who need international protection. Actually, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights said in the resolution 218, addressed in March, 1 month ago, the right to request and receive asylum has evolved in the Americas since the adoption of the Cartagena Declaration on Refugees of 1984, which expanded the definition of refugee by recognizing as refugees those who have fled their countries due to widespread violence, foreign aggression, internal conflicts, massive violations of human rights, or other circumstances that have seriously disrupted public order. So my first point is to try to check the different sources in the normative international standards of protection to try to know, as Venezuelans who have left the country, what are our rights first. And on the other hand, I would like to emphasize about the importance of academic freedom, because we are really concerned about the situation of the universities in Venezuela and the situation of the our professors are leaving the country. And so I want to say that the dictatorships, the dictators used to attack universities as they used to attack the press. The academic freedom as human rights is very related to the freedom of expression, in terms of we have the right as university professors to prepare the class, to produce scientific knowledge, to share this knowledge, to produce the debates in classroom, but those are really important for democracy. And universities are in the target of any dictatorship. So the history of the different dictators in Latin America confirms that situation. For that reason, I would like to ask the Venezuelans who are in other countries to try to take in consideration, to try to be involved about the situation of universities, because the universities represent the oxygen of democracy in a country. And about the role of the diaspora in the countries Venezuelans are right now, I think it is the role of the civil society. The role of civil society must be a protagonic role in the advocacy of human rights, as Professor Isu just said, in the research of violations of human rights, in the report and documenting those violations, and in the incidents or advocacy before the parliaments or before the international human rights bodies. It is really important. For instance, when we have addressed any report or defend any report before any international body, Venezuelans who are in Geneva, Switzerland, or who are in Washington, because the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights is there, or here in New York there are many NGOs, important NGOs, and one of the headquarters of the United Nations is here. It's really important to try to support this work because we are not alone. So my general recommendation is to follow, to be concerned and to act and to work in order to recover democracy and to respect human rights.
Well, thank you so much to both of our panelists for an excellent panel discussion on these very important issues that we're faced with. Not only those who live in Venezuela right now, but also those of us who have left and still have family members, and we still have a lot of links and bonds to our own country. Okay, so thank you so much. And now we would like to start the Q&A session. So anybody who has questions, you're more